All right, Sandeep, I guess pretty straightforward question. We've seen the results come in over the last week in the Seattle mayor's race. What's your read on the numbers as they have come in and Katie Wilson looking like the apparent winner?
Well, I think Katie Wilson is the winner of this race. I mean, barring some really, really unusual, anomalous, last minute reversal, she's up now almost outside of recount range. I do think right now we are still within the range for a mandatory recount because it's less than 0.5%. But even in these last few ballots get counted, if her lead grows a little bit more, we're going to be outside of recount range. So this race is all but over.
How do you explain what we just saw? There were a record number of ballots dropped off on election day, which it seems like did slow up the process a little bit, according to King County elections. 20,000 more drop-offs on election day than 4 years ago. How do you think that factored into this race? So many late votes.
I think it really helped Katie Wilson and is probably decisive in putting her over the top and her emerging victorious. When you look at Dropbox ballots, they tend to perform much more to the left than mail-in ballots do in Seattle. And that's because it's typically like younger people voting late and they, don't want to put their ballot in the mail. So they go to a Dropbox and drop it off. So the fact that we were seeing this big boost in Dropbox ballots was always a very good sign for Katie. And it seems to be panning out.
You and I both know that this has been a trend for now more than a decade in Seattle, where the late votes, the people who drop their ballots off on Tuesday, tend to be more progressive, tend to vote for the furthest left candidate. Why is that? How can you put that into words? Why is that? Because a lot of people still are like, how does the vote swing so hard?
Yeah, it's become a really pronounced feature of our elections in Seattle in particular. In the last 3 mayoral races before this one, the shift from election night to the final vote in terms of the margin of victory was 9 points, 10 points, and 12 points. And we're seeing the same pattern here, though actually in this race, it's actually a little bit less than the last 3 elections. And what this really is a function of, again, the demographics of who's voting when. Younger voters vote a lot later than older voters do, and how various demographic groups perform in Seattle elections. Age is a big driver. If you're over the age of 45, you're more likely to be a kind of center left or moderate voter. If you're under the age of 45, you're much more likely to be a kind of left lane voter and use a drop box and all of that stuff. And again, that's what accounts for the shift. Those younger voters vote late, and they just politically, they're much more progressive, much more left. And so when those votes get counted late, we see this shift up.
So putting on your independent hat, even though I know you and I both know that you've been involved in a lot of campaigns over time. For outsiders, for people who are outside the city, they're like, how did Katie Wilson pull this off? Somebody who ran a small nonprofit, the Transit Riders Union, taking on the establishment candidate who's been at City Hall for 15, 20 years. How did she pull this off?
Well, first of all, it's a remarkable achievement on her part. And she ran an innovative and energized and successful campaign. And she really did come out of nowhere. When this race first started, I think the conventional wisdom, which I shared, was that the mayor was headed for a cakewalk win. He had locked up the support of all of the major constituencies, business and labor and Democratic elected officials. Everybody was endorsing the mayor. He was raising all the money he needed. And she really seemed like she had no chance. And instead, what she did was she, first of all, figured out a message that this wasn't an election like previous election cycles about crime or street disorder. This was an election where voters were much more worried about affordability. So she figured out a message, and then she figured out a way to build grassroots energy and buzz and support. She really used social media, particularly video, TikTok, Instagram, Reels, to get her message out there in front of younger voters. It kind of caught fire with them, and it really sort of fueled her rise. And then once the ball starts rolling downhill, it becomes hard to stop. And that's what she did. She created momentum and buzz, and then it just sort of built from there.
I asked you before the election, do you think her race, Mamdani in New York, speaks to a larger issue across the country amongst Democrats?
It does, to some, I mean, it does to some extent, for sure. Look, I think in blue cities and big blue cities around the country, progressive cities like Seattle and New York, socialism is having a moment, right? I mean, both of these candidates are self-avowed socialists. And I think that for a lot of younger voters who are feeling pressured by the high cost of living, by maybe the perception that they're never going to be able to, afford to buy a house in these very expensive cities, maybe the economy or the job picture is not looking as rosy and they're anxious about what their job prospects are or their prospects for advancement. That's what's, I think, fueling an interest in some of these sort of what I think what once would have been considered sort of pretty far to the left viewpoints, in cities. Now, is that is that the winning formula for the Democratic Party nationally? I really, really doubt that. Right. I mean, I don't think once you get outside of places like, Brooklyn or Capitol Hill in Seattle, that some of these messages are going to play the same way. And you saw that with these gubernatorial races in New Jersey and Virginia, where Democratic candidates won really big, and they were very much in the moderate lane, right? They were not running the way Mamdani or Katie Wilson were running, and they are rolling up big wins too.
That was awesome. I'm hitting end.
Great.